Welcome to the Better Two podcast. I'm your host, Donna. Today's guest is Ray Roldan. Ray is the owner of Ray B PR. And, well, he has some stories. And I do mean some stories. We talk about Britney. We talk about, well, you'll just have to find out. Tune in. Hi, Ray. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. And I'm glad I'm going to say this. The reason Ray and I know each other is because one of his clients, Danny Saber, who was on the podcast, I took a shot and reached out to you. And I'm glad I did because it's been nice working with your agency, and I've really been looking forward to doing this.
Well, I'm kind of flattered because I'm usually the guy behind the curtain, publicist. Like I'm not one of those publicists who put themselves in front of the artist because there's so many of them that do. But I prefer to stay behind the curtain, and so the fact that that you took interest in talking to me is humbling. So thank you.
You're welcome. And congratulations, it's 30 years that you're a publicist.
Yeah, it's scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think I started in 95 was my first gig, and it has been 30 years. And I was a journalist for about 5 years before that. So it was, I've been doing this for a long time.
Who was your first client?
My very first client when I first started in publicity. I mean,
Hmm.
my first gig was actually I was a glorified intern at a soundtrack label called Milan Records. They're still around to this day. And
Okay.
one of the first projects I think I worked on was a film called, it was the Benny and June soundtrack. I started working at the label as that record was dying down. And I was in charge, I was in publicity. And the funny thing about that was there were so many people complaining that that soundtrack only had the Proclaimers' I Would Walk 500 Miles as the only vocal track on that record, on that album. The rest of it was score. So a lot of people bought that soundtrack thinking there's going to be there's going to be a soundtrack, not a score,
Hmm.
and so I had to I was on the phones and back when before email, I was on the phones talking to people and saying yeah, if you're so unhappy, you can return it, but listen to the score,
Yeah.
and yeah, that was actually one of the first things I worked on. Is I mean that I can remember so long ago.
Yeah, Biddy and June, I remember that movie. And the
Mm.
funny thing is that was kind of, after that you could buy the score or you could buy the CD that had all the music on it.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think we learned a lesson from that because I mean that record I think it went platinum, either gold or platinum for the label. Um, but there's also a lot of returns from it because of the fact that people bought it thinking they're going to get a lot more Proclaimers and other songs from the soundtrack. But yeah, I mean, we got the plaques.
And and
So
back and and back then you had the single. You could always go buy the cassette
yeah,
single or CD single or
exactly, exactly. So yeah, that was actually fun. That was a
so
fun.
you were a journalist first, and
Mm.
the only reason you kind of shifted was because it wasn't paying the bills, correct?
Yeah. I mean, I was in Boston. I was fresh out of college. I started a magazine up there called The Improper Bostonian, one of five people. And it was actually huge. 80,000 circulation, it was, and we launched at 80,000 circulation. And I was I was one of the five people who launched it. And went into direct competition with a historically important weekly, the Boston Phoenix, and we went head to head with them, and we were much more irreverent because with the improper Bostonian name, you had to be, and we the magazine survived up until a few years ago. Over I think it stuck around for over 19 or 20 years.
Wow.
So it remained successful. But I was writing for a ton of magazines across the country. Started up a bunch of fanzines and did that whole entire thing. But again, living in Boston and trying to be a journalist, I also had a side gig as a an animator. So I worked in animation for a while with a really big animation studio called Olive Jar. We did like lots of commercials and interstitials for MTV, ABC. Like, if you watch some of the early MTVs, like, the commercials and interstitials, I worked on a lot of them. And ABC Saturday morning cartoon interstitials as well. I don't know if you remember the one where you see a dog sniffing a fire hydrant, and then the fire hydrant sprouts a face and then shoots the dog across the screen with water. Um, that
I
was one
think
of the ones I worked on, and that was actually a lot of fun, that kind of thing. So, but I was making $14,000 a year in Boston, which was
so.
nothing, and I was like, I couldn't survive on free meals being a restaurant critic, for as part of my job as one of the editors, because you couldn't get that many free meals, you know. So I moved back down to New Jersey, New York, the New York area, and got in the music business, and I got lucky, you know.
Well, when people think of prestigious jobs, they think a journalist, a food critic, you're going to get all these free meals. Not always. I mean, when I got to be a disc jockey, which I lucked into, I was making $5 an hour. And granted,
Mm,
it was 1993, and it wasn't my only source of income. But when you think about it, $5 an hour is not much, especially when you're only doing it on the weekend. So you get
yeah,
4-hour shifts, and it's like I have some pocket change. It's not
exactly.
glamorous, but everybody's like, "Oh, but you did." No, not really. Not
Yeah,
really.
I used to DJ here in New York at a number of places. Like I spun at the Limelight, Don Hills, a lot of the big venues back in the day, like, the '90s, and people think, like, oh, you get all this access, and I did. I like, people would recognize me. I'd go to different bars, different clubs, when I wasn't DJing, and I would get free drinks and free entry to back then. And back then, a lot of the New York clubs had that velvet rope kind of thing where you were chosen to enter the
Hmm.
club. And because I was a DJ at some of these clubs, I got free entry. Like, I got entry immediately. Um, and they think that you live a glamorous life, but for like DJing for like 7 hours straight, and you get paid what, $50?
Yeah.
It's not very
Yeah.
glamorous.
No.
I mean, it looks good, but yeah.
Well, and to clarify, I always call it a disc jockey, but now it's on-air personality. But yeah, I mean, it's like you may think it's glamorous, but it's not.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like you think it's butter, but it's not. It's chiffon. Anyway, so you moved on to becoming a publicist, and it's like I guess what I want to ask you is, you've been a publicist, you've been an animator, you've been a disc jockey, you've been a journalist, and you were even a manager at one point too, correct?
Hmm. Yeah,
So
I managed a few artists as well.
what really calls to you? Is it the publicist thing? Does that really just still ignite your blood?
I think it's more of the creativity part of it.
Okay.
I mean, I was like, it's like being able to be challenged. Like, I love being challenged. Especially when you're given an artist, by like, a brand new, like, artist who doesn't really have a footprint at all in the entertainment world, and like, the manager or the label says to you, hey, like, we have this artist. What can you do with them? And being able to get them, recognition, and be able to, like, I mean, it sounds corny, but like, to like help them achieve their dream of getting their music heard, or like getting their book read, or like, film scene, or anything that I'm working on, is exciting,
Mhm.
and I like working with developing artists and new artists much more than maintaining a career, because I did all that. I worked with artists who are already huge, and like, it's you're basically, when you're doing that, there's creativity, but not much. But when you're working with an artist who doesn't have any type of foundation, nobody knows who they are really. Um, Turning people onto that is it's exciting, you know. And I love that. That's like, that's one of the things that I've always loved doing. I mean, that goes into when I was a journalist. I was actually always finding those artists that didn't get that much press and writing about them. So then So whoever's reading the magazine would I get to know them. Same thing with being a DJ. You you play a song that everybody knows, you get them out on the dance floor, and then you play something that they don't know, and then having them come up to you to the DJ booth and say, "Who is that?" And then
Yeah.
you kind of spread the word. It's kind of like that's exciting to me. That's what I love. So,
Well, and I would think when you're working with an established artist, they have their path, they have their ego, they have how they do things, and you don't have as much leeway for creativity.
mhm. Exactly, exactly. You're just helping them move along as opposed to move up,
Right.
and I love and like I love that ability to help them,
Mhm.
it's what fuels me, to be honest with you.
Well, I mean, like doing this, when I've talked to a lot of newer country artists. I had a publicist I was working with who had a lot of country artists, and I've talked to them as they're starting this journey and everything. And one of them just got to sing the national anthem at the Pro Bowl. And
Wow.
I'm so proud of her, even though I only talked to her briefly, one conversation, but it's nice to see her grow. So I understand
Hmm.
where you're coming from because it's like, here's a person with a dream. And I remember being that person with a dream and then pursuing it and seeing it grow. It's a gift. It's a gift to be
Hmm.
part of that. It's a gift to watch them take off.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that kind of feel like, kind of feeds into one of the ways that I was actually able to make a name for myself as a publicist. Like when I was at Jive working with the Backstreet Boys and working with Buddy Guy, working with John Mayall and KRS-One and all these really big artists. And I remember the president of Jive Records coming to my department, the publicity department. I was a manager of publicity at that point. I was like mid-level, not calling any of the shots or anything like that. And the president of the label kind of coming to us saying, "Oh wait, so we just signed this young artist. She is 15 years old. What do you think you could do with her?" And and I said, I kind of have an idea what we can do with her, and because she was a pop artist, and like the marketing person and I talked about it. We were like, why don't we follow the footprint of somebody like what's her name? Debbie Gibson or Tiffany, back when we were kids, and they started out in the malls, playing to kids, and they would also be in advertise like in stores for advertising clothing for girls, like or little girls, and we did that with this one artist. We put her through the malls. She was playing at malls. She was she didn't even have a song out yet. She was like, and she was in Adelia's um, catalog, and which was aimed at tweens,
Okay.
and she started to build her audience then. And then about after a year, we finally had the song for her, and it was "Baby One More Time," and it was Britney Spears, and like watching her like being that instrumental in her career, like, kind of helping steer her to to who she became and watch her become like a 15 million album selling artist all within like a year and a half was incredible, you know? Um, and it was fun to be part of that, be like, that I've done so many interviews in the past about being part of that, part of that machine. And the thing is, I was her day-to-day publicist. I was with her all the time, traveling with her to LA, going to Miami with her. I remember being on a plane with John Norris from MTV when MTV did their very first feature on her. We flew out to Kentwood, Louisiana, and we hung out with her family and all that stuff. This was only Baby One More Time had just come out when she was massive, and seeing that happen, and being part of that was incredible, you know. And that's kind of what helped kind of build that I don't want to call it thirst because that sounds kind of crazy, but like that desire to be creative and helping build people,
Mhm.
because I saw it go from zero to a gazillion miles an hour in less than a year. and being able to use that for other artists was something that I thought was actually really kind of fun to do, but also really, really great for the artist, you know.
It's got to be a shift though to watch when you're in that situation and around that. Um, how hard was it for her to deal with that massive amount of fame for you? I mean, as her publicist, are there offers coming at you to do this, to do that, and you have to weed through that, or is that up to her manager?
Well, most of it was like I was gatekeeper,
Yeah.
when it came to press, like, I was actually the one who was the first person that a lot of people went to get an interview with her, and so like I became gatekeeper. And for me, it's like I was often good cop when like in my department. The VP of the department would get all the big offers at first. Well, no, that's me. Let me rephrase that. We were both getting a lot of the big offers at the same time, but she would always say no. She was like she would always like turn them down, and I mean, when people came to me, I would actually talk to them and see what we could do, try to make it happen. But anybody who was a really big outlet who went to like my boss at the time, if she said no, they came to me, and I would actually find a way to make it work because like I saw it as an opportunity for her to grow, not to be like this sheltered, heavily protected artist um, who has a wrong sort of mystique about him, and a lot of press when you say no, no, no constantly, a lot of press will take that and turn that into a negative, and feel like if they were shunned, they're going to want to see that artist fail,
Yeah.
and that wasn't my goal. I wanted to see everybody like who like support her, so then as she grew, they could all embrace her and say that they were there from the beginning, you know, and as she got bigger, they remember that. And there's some journalists to this day, like one journalist. I mean, I won't mention her name, but she's a very very big journalist at NPR, um, who still credits. I don't say credits, but she still remembers the fact that the interview that she did on Britney when she was still a young artist or a young writer, was what got her foot in the door and be taken seriously, as a journalist. And now she's at NPR. There's another journalist who I hooked her up. She had a tiny little blog before blogs even existed, called Lindsay's House of Insanity. And I actually hooked her up with an interview with Britney, and she had her views at the time were maybe about I don't know 50 to 50 people reading her blog, and it's probably all family, but got her an interview with Britney. But all of a sudden that thrusted her into the spotlight, and now she's like a senior exec at E Entertainment Television.
Wow.
It's like that, those kind of stories, they remember that, and I love seeing people rise around around me, and that's that's part of the excitement for me, you know.
And that's a gift. I mean, if you can appreciate, because there's a lot of people that don't want to see somebody else rise. And
Mm,
that's the one thing if you're looking outside at the entertainment industry, you watch people rise and then you watch the media tear them down.
mhm.
And that's where I guess I'm coming from. It's like there's a lot of people that'll wish success, and you seem to genuinely wish success. But there's so many out there that are like, oh, well, now their 15 minutes are done, and now we just have to tear them apart. And Britney is a perfect example. I mean, we're not going to go deep into that, but you understand what I'm getting at. I mean, everybody
Mhm.
loved Britney until they didn't.
Yeah, exactly.
And
And
that's the unfortunate part.
mhm. Well, that's and especially when you're like a woman in music per se, for example, with Britney, when she became really huge, Christina Aguilera came out soon after, and I have stories about Britney and Christina being really good friends before Christina's record came out, and then all of a sudden when Christina's record came out, the press decided that they were going to turn it into a competition, in which it was a Britney, good girl Britney versus bad girl Christina. And I remember seeing that happen and talking to the press. I was like, no, they're friends. I remember seeing them at parties because they both came out of the Mickey Mouse Club. They were like we went to a Team People party in which Brittany was waiting. Brittany and I were waiting at the top of the steps for Christina to arrive. This was before Genie in the Bottle came out. And as soon as Christina arrived, they hugged each other, grabbed each other's hands, and went running through the party. You know, and it was like it was really it was that kind of like friendship that they had. But then as soon as Christina's record came out, it became a competition. You know, and you see that a lot with women artists, and like that sort of um, like like that competition thing, which is terrible. You know,
Hmm.
I mean, you're seeing it now with a lot of artists, and it's like it just doesn't need to be there at all.
But even before Britney, I mean, look at Jane Mansfield and Marilyn Monroe.
Hmm.
They pit them against it. It's like they always find a way to create a narrative to pit women, like woman against woman.
Hmm.
And, there's the infamous picture of Jane Mansfield and I believe Sophia Loren. And Sophia Loren's looking down at Jane Mansfield because her cleavage is exposed, like
Hmm.
really exposed. And so you're always having that narrative. And yes, it gets worse. And I think because now we have social media, you guys can't control the narrative as tightly.
Yeah, yeah, and you see that a lot, especially with what happened with recently with I think it was Billie Eilish and Taylor Swift at the Grammys. Or no, I'm sorry, it wasn't at the Grammys. It was at another awards ceremony in which Taylor Swift gave Billie Eilish an award, and Taylor Swift did a speech about Billie Eilish for a few minutes, and then when Billie Eilish got up and and said like, yeah, a lot of people are they go on and on and on with their speeches, not talking about Taylor Swift, but just talking in general. And press decided to turn that into look at Billie Eilish, she hates Taylor Swift, and that
Hmm.
wasn't even the actuality of what was going on. And it's like they always try to do that. They always try to tear, like, especially women, like women in music. It's like they try to do that create that narrative.
Well, and that will sell papers, and that will sell, well, not papers
Hmm.
so much now, but that will get those clicks. It's clickbait. It's great, great for those clicks and the engagement. But the thing is it really true? I had somebody tell me about a certain band once, a couple of years back, um, that the band would never lie to us. They would tell us all the truth. They would never lie to us. And I'm just like, do you realize how this works? That there's publicists and managers and everybody that creates a narrative? But I didn't
Hmm.
say that to the person because I let them believe what they wanted to believe. And I think that's a huge thing with Hollywood and the music industry that we paint this narrative. And I'm not saying it's wrong because you want
Hmm.
people to buy the product, and the product at a certain point is that person. It's
Yeah.
the music, but it's also the person.
Hmm. Well,
And
which kind of gets back to like kind of an interesting segue in like um a lot of that the idea of celebrity has died down quite a bit, in the music world especially, and that's one of the things that I'm um, trying to resurrect in a sense, like this idea of fandom, because music is digested in streams. Like you don't like people listen to like their Spotify streams or whatever, and they don't really pay attention to the artist. They know the song, but they don't know the artist's name anymore. And I hate that fact that like people don't know who these artists are, and because I remember being a kid, and I was a huge U2 fan. You know, um, I would actually rip out pictures out of magazines, put it in my locker. I knew what Dave, like what the Edge's real name was. Dave Evans. I knew Bono was Paul Houston. I knew where they lived in where they grew up in Ireland. And like all that kind of stuff was part of the fandom. Like being able to embrace these artists and like know who their producers are and know like all the little nitty gritty. Like I would actually read their like the liner notes of their albums and see who the producer was, see who they thanked, and wonder if like, do I know that person, or like who's that, who are these people? And that was the exciting part of like digesting music as a kid, and being a fan of these artists. And we don't have that anymore because of the fact that vinyl and liner notes, you don't really see liner notes anymore. unless you buy vinyl. Thankfully, vinyl's coming back in vogue again, but it's more of a vanity thing than really people actually buying it for the same reasons that we did as a kid. And like, one thing that I want to do as a publicist is create that idea of fandom again, where somebody will know one of my artists, like, may like, like, and become a fan of the artist. So they like this record, but also are going to follow them to the next record, you know. And I think that's really the important part of building careers and building records, because there are so many publicists out there who live project to project. They'll work with a record, and like, they'll get a new record from an artist, and they'll put all of their attention on that record, without thinking about the artist. They just think like, I need to prove to the client that I can get press about this record. So they're going to get reviews, they'll get features and stuff like that, but they're not thinking about the artist, about where the artist goes next. And because the project, like, after the 3 months that they work on this record, they're not paid anymore.
Right.
The campaign's over. I kind of have a different view of it, because I come from an artist development mindset, in which my job is to help the artist build a career, and move on. Whether or not I work on that next record, that's not important to me. I want people to know the artist. I want people to get familiar with the artist enough that they can actually, that after the project that I'm working on is over, they're going to go on to the next record, and hopefully they'll remember what I did, so they can hire me again to work on, like, to keep working with them. I mean, there's some clients of mine that have been with me for 10, 15 years, like, and I've worked multiple records. And part of that is because of the fact that they know that I'm there for them, not just for that project, you know. And yeah, like, being able to build a profile for an artist is so important. And have people know that when they interview the artist, like, that, like, they know everything about it, so they can actually interview these artists and ask the right questions, and help this artist become, somebody who people can follow, not just know a song that they heard on Spotify. You know?
And what you're exactly saying, I mean, I remember when I discovered Rick Springfield, so we're talking 1983, and yes, Rick
Mm.
Springfield. But when I discovered Rick Springfield, it was like, I'm going to go back and yes, I had pictures in my locker. And I went back and I bought his records from the 70s, his Comic Book Heroes record. And I got all these things that I wanted. I mean, granted, they were used and everything, but it was like, it was a mission. I needed to learn everything could.
Mhm.
And that was the fandom. It's like you had to find those pieces, so you knew what you were reading, what you were learning. And yeah, the man was old enough to be my dad, but at the time, but I mean, it's my very first. I can sit there and say my very first fandom was Sean Cassidy, because I
Mhm.
had his record, the Do Run Run record, and then he was on the Hardy Boys. So it was just this whole little. Yes, I was a little kid then, but it was the whole thing of fandom, and even Battlestar Galactica back then. We had those fandom moments, and yeah, we don't even with TV shows. Yes, we have those moments of, but it's not the same. Before it
Mhm.
was like you'd watch something on TV, and then the next day at work, you were all about talking about it. And now it's
Mhm.
like,
Yeah, I was reading something actually online about the best new artist thing. Like, there's somebody who was saying, like, because Chappell Roan won best new artist, no one would ever hear about her again. And like, and I countered them and said, like, like, that's not necessarily true. Whether like, what happens to her next is part of her trajectory. And he's like, and he responded, um, look at somebody like Little Nas X. No one's ever that after he won his award, he's disappeared. And I had to school him and saying, like, he didn't disappear. The record, like, the record cycle is, like, from his last record is over. He's working on a new record. When the new record comes out, you're going to hear about him again. It's not like, just because you're not hearing about him now doesn't mean he's over. Same thing with Lizzo. Like, they were talking about Lizzo, like, how Lizzo, like, was selling out all these venues, and now, like, she probably can't even sell out, like, a venue that holds 200. And I was like, she's there are these waves that happen because artists, like, put out a record, they're everywhere, and then they go away. to refresh, and so they can come out with another record soon after. And he was talking about like Taylor Swift, and I was like, but Taylor Swift puts out a record almost every year,
Hmm.
and because she's like, and because she's such um, celebrity fodder, everybody's like is going to talk about her because she's going to these football games, because she's here, because she's there. It's not as if she's like that she's chasing after this stuff. People are writing about it because of what she's doing, whether or not she's actually feeding it. And I kind of explained to them, like, there's some artists that are very open and like, with social media, and everything about them, and there's so much controversy because the stuff that happens in their lives, and they can't help themselves but post it on social media. Taylor Swift doesn't do that. There's a mystique about her. You think you know about her, but you don't. What her publicist Tree Payne is amazing, but what Tree is putting out there. And Taylor is a very private person. Like, you don't know all this stuff. You think you do, but like the truth is, like, she's not posting on social media all the time. And a lot of the stuff she does is really kind of under the radar. I love all of her humanitarian stuff that she does. She doesn't like tout about it. Like, she doesn't like post about it. People find out about it, and I think that's the beauty of it, is that she doesn't like that she's actually an artist who respects the art. She and she doesn't have to rely on social media to create controversies about herself. And she's and like, I'm a Swiftie. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I love the stuff that she does, and but like, I think she's doing publicity in the right way. She's creating a persona. She's creating fandom. Like, people want everything. They have shirts. They have they have T-shirts. They have posters. All that stuff. And I think it's like it's great to see that fandom is still alive. I just want it to be a lot more widespread, like it was when we were kids. You know.
Right. I mean, okay, we'll go back to the 90s and we'll talk about fandom for a little bit. The Spice Girls. Okay, I was not a Spice Girls fan. Okay, shoot me. Now I'll tell you I'm a Spice Girls fan, but that's because I knew somebody that was working with them at the time. I knew the person that was the music director, and I got to go see them live. Once I saw them live and the way they respected the fact that their audience was so young, that they created it like a theater production. So there was an intermission in the middle of the show. And
Mm,
they proved while watching them live that there was this talent. But overall, when you look at the Spice Girls, there was a movie, there was dolls, there was everything. There was fandom.
mm,
And you really don't see, yes, Taylor had a doll and everything, but you don't see the mass marketing like we used to either.
mm. Yeah, exactly. Because I think because of the idea of fandom is so quick, become like that. A lot of people aren't going to invest, like a lot of merch people aren't going to invest in it as much as they did back then. You mentioned Battlestar Galactica and the Hardy Boys and Sean Cassidy and stuff like that. When they were stars, they like there was a sort of separation between fans and the celebrity, um, in which you weren't oversaturated. Sure, like, Christy McNichol, like, and Jimmy McNichol, there were posters, there were T-shirts, all that stuff. But, when you found out about something, it was usually about 3 months later, because the nature of publishing back then,
Hmm.
a print publication. When there was a scandal that happened, publicists and managers had 3 months, or well, maybe like sometimes like a week, to be able to remedy it before it hit the newspapers and stuff like that. Now things are so immediate, and like, artists stars rise and fall very quickly, whether or not it's justified. Like, that's the problem with social media, and I think because of that, you don't have a lot of that, like, the lasting sort of like, it's a lot of it's ephemera. Like, it just comes and goes, so you don't have that time to really predict if it's going to be a big seller. If you're going to make a Taylor Swift doll, you better hope that Taylor Swift is going to continue being huge. But like, it's the fandom's completely different now,
Hmm.
and you don't really have that anymore.
No.
you know. I mean, I remember like when I was working at IRS Records way back when, um, RuPaul was still like in the clubs here, and she wasn't like the RuPaul's Drag Race wasn't there, but I helped her for a little while with the RuPaul Barbie doll or the doll. I don't know
Hmm.
if you remember that,
Mm-mm.
and that was a huge seller. But I think that was that was the beginning of the end of that sort of fandom, you know, because I started to see like the returns weren't as crazy it was back then. Star Wars had all the dolls. You can get the mini action figures or you can get the huge ones.
Right up there.
Yeah, exactly. I see that behind you. Um, yeah, and it's like, and it's funny because when she put that doll out, sure, a very targeted audience, because drag queens were still not embraced like like as universally as they are today, but still like it was something that collectors wanted, but it did really well, surprisingly did really well. But that was, again, like I saw that as kind of almost like the tail end of dying fandom because it just wasn't the same anymore.
So what is your plan to bring fandom back? I mean, how do you create, because part of the problem going back to streaming services is a lot of artists now are not doing the record thing. They're doing a song here, a song
Hmm.
there, a song here, and then eventually I'll put them on all on a record. Rarely do you hear. I had interviewed a gentleman named Nate Merchant. He actually has done some producing more or less now. He's moved into that arena. He did 30 Seconds to Mars and stuff. But he did his own record. He did a record, and it has a story to tell. And you can't listen to a record on a streaming service, especially if it goes to random, if with a story to tell, if it's all scattered.
Hmm.
So you lose something.
Well, what I do with my artists is, I mean, this is the secret. I mean, it's not that much of a secret, but it's something that I do that a lot of publicists don't do. When I start working with an artist, I have a questionnaire that I send to them. It's like a 4 or 5 page questionnaire asking what their um, what their favorite bands are, if they're reading books, if they have tattoos, if they have tattoos, what are the stories behind tattoos, um, that like really kind of those kind of questions that you remember, like when you read like Star Hits or any of those magazines back in the past, you'd have a page, occupation, like
Hmm.
hometown, favorite meal, like and you found out about your stars and what they like, what their favorite candy was, that kind of stuff. I send my a lot of my artists these questionnaires to find out those little pieces about them. So because one of the things that happens these days, a lot of people don't read music magazines as much as they used to, you know, and a lot of times they're not reading music magazines to find artists, but to learn about the artists that they're already familiar with. So it's harder to make fans from like from just music magazines. One thing I do is I like ask them about different talents that they have or different hobbies or things like that, that make them interesting. And I'll use an example. Somebody who you and I have talked about, and I'm still going to try to get him on like on here with you. But Chuck Reagan, for example, Chuck Reagan is like a superstar in the punk world. His band Hot Water Music is a massive band that that's grown. But he also has taken on a solo career, which has grown. I've been his publicist since his second record, and I've been with them for almost like 20 years now. And one of the things that I found out that he did was he was a fly fisherman, and fishing is one of his passions. And so one of the things that I did to help build his fandom or his profile was start pitching him to magazines about fishing. One of the first publications I got him in was a journal called Fly Fish Journal, and very dry. It's all about fly fishing, but they've never really had a celebrity who could talk about fly fishing. And here's Chuck, who loves it. He knows the sport. He knows everything about it. And they interviewed him, and he ended up getting a lot of fans from that. because like he would actually go to concerts, like he would actually play at concerts, and after the show, people would go up to him and said, "Hey, I never even knew who you were, and this isn't the kind of music that I normally listen to, but I read about you in Fly Fish Journal, so I wanted to check you out." And I love your music, and so he found a lot of fans that way.
Yes.
And we did that with, like, got him in like Outside Magazine, Field and Stream, and all these different things. And he's built actually a fly fish business out in Grass Valley, California. And so he splits his time between being on the road and doing these fly fishing tours, and it feeds all into it. There's another band named Bayside, an emo band. They're big in that world, like headline, like they'll play like venues of like 3,000-4,000 people, and sell it out. And they didn't really have much of a profile. I worked with them for probably about 10 years. And Jack from the band told me that he creates crossword puzzles, but mathematically, not like just, making a crossword puzzle. He does it mathematically. I can't remember who the person is, like, the legendary person who created the crossword puzzle. And it's like, but he modeled himself after that person. And when I was working on their second record, I think it was the second record that I worked with, um, trying to get them outside of magazines like Alternative Press and New Noise, magazines that were alternative and focused in on emo, was impossible. But what I did was I actually reached out to Delta Spirit magazine, that magazine that you see in every on like in every Delta flight that you forced to read, your captive audience. And I talked to the editors there, and I asked them, like, I was like, hey, like, I know you don't normally call, like, you don't normally like do stories on musicians, but I have a musician that could do a Delta Spirit crossword specifically for you guys. And like, if he does that, can you put a little column about him? And they're like, that sounds great. And like, he created like a crossword puzzle specifically for Delta Airlines. And they did a half-page story on him that got them so many fans, because
Nice.
like, people who never even heard of them, or even might have heard of them but just didn't know, like, that Jack actually had this talent, and that made them read about the band, and they got fans that way. Like, I worked with Less Than Jake, and they collect Pez dispensers, like a massive collection, and I got them in Collectors Magazine, like things like that, to kind of to because you never know where your fans are going to come from. you know I remember one time, like, this is going way back, when I was Buddy Guy's publicist, and um, the Subway stores, like, the sandwich stores, used to have a newsletter that they would put in every single bag. They have it on the counters of the stores, and I got Buddy Guy a Q&A in there. It was just something I thought was, like, was silly. I didn't think anything of it. And the president, or my president of the label at the time, Silvertone Records, he went to Subway, and he got a sandwich, and he opened it up, and he saw that. And I remember him calling me, like, calling me on the phone and saying, like, Ray, I was in Subway, and I saw Buddy Guy in the Subway, like, newsletter. And I thought he was going to completely bitch me out, but he praised me, because he's like, that's really creative marketing. He's like, every person across the US is going to get this newsletter in their Subway bag, like, when they get their sandwich, and they're going to read it, and you just completely changed that whole entire trajectory of his career. And I didn't think anything of it. But 6 months later, I don't know. I mean, I don't think this had anything to do with it, but 6 months later, he was nominated for a Grammy, and he won.
Nice.
So, and it was just funny, because, like, he, like, the president of the label at the time, said to me, he's like, yeah, this is all you, because of Subway. And I was like, you never know where you're going to get your fans, and that's, again, part of profile building. If you can relate to an artist in what they enjoy doing, you may embrace them more than if you just knew the song. you know
Oh, yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I do this is because sure, we can come on, you can play music if you want. We've never really done that, but you can talk about your music, but I really want the artist to be known for who they are. I want people to get to know the artist, and it's not just about the song. Sure, we can
Hmm.
talk about, I mean, like when I interviewed Tracy, I could have sat there and we could have talked about the song the whole time, but that's not who she is. That was a
Hmm.
blip on her life trajectory, but that's not who she is.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And with Tracy, with Tracy Bonham, I mean, like the fact that she was like she sold platinum with that with Mother Mother, like that
Hmm.
song went huge, and people still remember her. But a lot of times when you have a huge song, people kind of fixate on that one song in your career. When in fact, she's had like what, maybe 20 to 25 years
Hmm.
beyond that song, and she's still putting out music, and there's so much more to her personality and her life than just that one song, you know.
Yeah. I want to talk to you because when you were interviewing people, you did, you're a U2 fan. You admitted you're a U2 fan. So what was it like when you got to sit down and interview with them?
With you too.
Hmm.
Well, I've actually never interviewed you two.
Well, I thought it
However,
said he's interviewed you too. That's why I asked.
oh well, actually, I was publicist. I actually worked with PJ Harvey at one point.
Okay.
Like I've seen you too. Okay, this is a little bit of my fandom. Up until the record Rattle and Hum, I had seen you two. I think it was 37 times. I saw them like every single time they came to the U.S. I saw them, like would see as many shows as I could. And I became like massive mega fan. I have all their vinyl, I have all their records, all that stuff. They knew me by name, like they would actually put me on guest lists. And I was a kid. I was like maybe 9, 10, 11 years old,
Wow.
and they would actually put me on guest lists. And I would see them and stuff like that. And what like the story that I love best was when I was working when I was helping out like a fellow publicist at Island Records, and I monitored like a PJ Harvey like interview for her at Madison Square Garden, and PJ Harvey were opening for U2 at that show. So Polly Harvey, lead singer, and I were like we're walking through the back. I don't know what to call it, like the back the no, it's not really a backstage area, but it's almost like a road. You can drive an SUV in the interior of Madison Square Garden, and we were walking, or she was actually back at her green room, and I was leaving at Madison Square Garden, almost got run over by this SUV, and like this big black SUV, and it ended up stopping. And then, like, I heard a door open. I stopped and I kind of like watched to see what was happening. Door opened, and then out pops Bono, you know, and um, I walk over to him and I was like, hey Bono, good to see you again. And he's like, where are you going? Who are you? And I kind of said to him, like, what do you mean, who am I? Like, you used to put me on your guest list. You should know who I am. And I was actually genuinely insulted, you know. Um, and he's like, who are you? What are you doing here? And I said to him, like, listen, I work with Polly. I'm leaving, like, again, and we're done with our interview. I think she was interviewed by CNN. I was like, I'm going home. And he's like, you're not staying for the show? I was like, I may come back, but like, I'm gonna go home now. And he pulls out in his pocket. He's like, he had 2 tickets in his pocket, and here's 2 tickets if you want them. They're for you. And I said to him, like, if I'm going to see the show, I'm going to watch it from the side of the stage because I work with PJ Harvey,
Hmm.
And I was like, so I don't need them. I was like, give them to somebody, to a fan who really wants them, because I kind of don't want them. And he said to me, he's like, I hope you're going to stay for the show. And I was like, well, I'm going to see PJ Harvey. I'm going to leave before U2 comes on, because I was pissed, you know.
I
Um,
understand. Oh, I have my own story about this, but go ahead.
and so he, like, he kind of like he kind of said, like, he's like, just tell me your name. He's like, I need to know who you are and how I know you. And I was like, don't worry about it. I'm going home, and I just walked away and I left. um that was a Friday night. I think they played Madison Square Garden on a Friday night. Monday, like, I went to the show, saw Polly, like, saw PJ Harvey. I stayed for a little while for YouTube, but I didn't, like, didn't stay for the whole thing. um Monday came and my I'm walking into to Island Records where I was working, walking towards my office. My assistant sees me in the hallway and she's like, you're not gonna want go in, you're not gonna want to go into your office. And I was like, why? And she's like, because I don't know if you're gonna be able to fit. And I was like, what? Open the door and there's like probably about like maybe 20 dozen roses, and two bottles of Dom Perignon on my desk. And I walk in, I look at it, and I say to her, like, I don't need these roses. Give them away to everybody in the office. So she went around giving people like roses. And I look at the two bottles of Dom Perignon, and one of them like had a card on it. And I opened the card, and it said something like I have the card somewhere downstairs, but it said something like, "I remember who you are. Sorry, like here's my apology. Hope to see you again soon at a show, Bono."
Wow.
And so I kind of laughed and I kind of like opened up one of the bottles. It was like 10 o'clock in the morning. Opened one of the bottles and shared it with my staff. And I called his manager, like the U2's manager at the time, Paul McGuinness, like rest in peace. And I said to him, I was like, if Bono's going to send me a card, make sure he writes it out because this was written by a computer. And and he's like, what do you? And he starts laughing. He's, what do you mean? I was like, if Bono's gonna send me a card, he needs to write it out himself. It's like, you tell him that. And I hung up. And yeah, when he cut, so like that was actually one of the times that one of my many U2 stories. But yeah, U2 and I have like the band and I have crossed paths so many times and everything. But yeah, friggin' Bono.
Yeah, I have my own band stories, but they're not you two. But anyway, I understand where you're coming from, and it is kind of insulting, especially if you've been on that guest list several times. And how do you not know me?
Yeah, it did. That happened to me today with Sting. Um,
Really?
because record store day, I think like I told you, I was actually at a record store launch party today, um, and uh, and Sting was the one of the guests that were up there, and I was Sting's tour publicist for a long time ago, and even worked with his son Joe Sumner. He had a band called Fiction Plane, and I was his publicist. And Sting would come to some of the shows, and I would actually like say hello to him. And Sting was there today with Trudy, his wife Trudy. And I kind of walked by Sting and I was like, and I kind of said to him, I was like, hey Sting. And I kind of like and he's like, oh hi. He's like, good to see you. And I could tell there was no there was no recognition at all. Really nice guy. I mean, I'm not bad mouthing whatsoever. He's a really super nice guy. Um, and a part of me wanted to say, you know who I am, but I was like, no, I'm gonna let it go. And I walked away. But but yeah, it was like one of these things where like I've worked with you. We've been together for so many times, like so many interviews, so many days, so many like trips and stuff. And I was like, I can't believe you don't remember who I am. But I also chalk it up to a lot of these people have hundreds and hundreds of people that are constantly glomming on them and and wanting their attention. For them to not remember who I am, for him not to remember who I am is fine. Bono, different story.
So, out of all the people that you've interviewed, because I mean, I'm looking at what I found, and it was like you've interviewed Kurt Cobain, U2, Joey Ramone, Sinead O'Connor, Bjork, PJ Harvey, and Vanilla Ice, and I'm sure a couple others. What was I know, and also Johnny Lydon I saw. Um, what was it like to interview these people? I mean, where you were coming up, did you ever get starstruck by any of them, or was it just like, oh yeah, this is my job? Because I mean, that's the thing. I think if you see them as normal people, which I have a feeling you do for the most part,
Mm.
I don't think even with you too, you don't seem like, oh my God. Um, was it like to sit down with like Kurt Cobain, especially now knowing what
Yeah,
happened?
well, Kurt was when I interviewed him. It was before "Smells Like Teen Spirit" hit. You
Okay.
know, it was a few weeks before that song came out, and like I knew it was a monster. I knew that record was going to be huge. And like I was in Boston at the time, and I sat down with Kurt, and I knew his previous record, Bleach, really well. And so hearing this record, it was like was completely I knew it was going to elevate them in a big way. um but I could tell that he was already feeling the effects of stardom. Like he was really like he was a really great interview. But he was also getting a little wary. The first time I interviewed him for Bleach, he was like fresh faced, like really kind of like wanted to talk about like like just like wrecking things and being like being just like following not really wrecking things. I don't mean it that way, but like just like just changing the trajectory of rock music. And then when I was like like interviewing for that second record, there was almost a cautiousness about him that felt like he was being rather protective and didn't want to give too much away. So he was like great interview, like stuff like that. I mean, there have been a few interviews that have been terrible, like Johnny Lydon. Um, but like I only get starstruck with one person, and it's somebody that nobody even knows pretty much, except for like a few people who still think they're like the band's great. But have you ever heard of the band the House Martins?
Yes.
Okay, so Paul Heaton from the House Martins
Okay.
is probably the only musician that I can't talk to. And when like and the funny story about that was I've been tasked to interview him a few times, and the first two times I interviewed him, I would just get tongue tied, couldn't say anything, and he had a band like he had a bandmate, Dave Hemingway, who the first time I was interviewing Paul, Dave heard what was going on, and he kind of slipped in, and he started answering some of the questions for me. I could talk to Dave Hemingway very well, but I couldn't look at Paul and talk to him. And I tried again interviewing him a few years later with the first Beautiful South record when House Martins broke up. Beautiful South was the next band, and I tried to interview Paul again, couldn't do it. And Dave Hemingway called me the guy that can't talk to Paul. And I'd see them a few other times, and he's like, "Oh, there's that guy that can't talk to Paul," and it was like it was funny, like like I could sit there and talk. Like I worked with the Who, and being able to like work with them and not feel intimidated, was like is like people are like, I can't believe you, like like I can't believe you're talking to them, and I was like, it's my job, um, working with like a lot of those artists, like I could be working with like some of the biggest artists in the world, and like it doesn't faze me, you know, um, and yeah, Paul like Paul Heaton from the House Martins, like they're my favorite band in the world, and even to this day, I think if I ever ran into them, I couldn't say a single thing to them.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, I don't think I've ever, yeah, I don't think I've ever had anybody that has just completely shut me down.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a long time ago when I met a certain person, they could shut me down, but now it's like, no, I give it as good as you get. You give it to me, I'm going to give it right back to you, and that's it. I don't have
Mm-hmm.
that problem anymore. Um, so yeah, I will admit I was a little nervous getting ready to talk to you tonight, and I don't know why, but I was, and it's no reason for it, but I was. I did want to talk to you about the Lorraine Warren paranormal thing because yes,
Ah.
I perused your Instagram, because I couldn't do a deep dive on other things, but so you had an entity attached to you allegedly, and you dabbled in the paranormal, so let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, I've always been really fascinated with paranormal.
Okay.
Like that was something like my mother was like was like my mother like my both my parents are Filipino, and
Hmm.
the Philippines are very like get very, I don't call them superstitious, but they have a real kind of like they like that mysticism, ghosts and things like that, and things that go bump in the night is part of that culture. So um and like I've always been really fascinated with horror, all that kind of stuff. And when I was a kid, like I have tons of experiences, like as a kid, stuff that I can't explain. I mean, I was playing with a Ouija board, talked to a couple named Beth and Dave Bespris, who I never knew who they were, but like that's who was answering me through the Ouija board. Found out years later that the couple who had lived in my house were named Beth and Dave Bespris, and so like stuff like that you can't explain.
No.
So when I got to college, I met a professor, a psychology professor named Daniel Baer, who had a class called The Future of Consciousness, and really wacky class. Everyone took it because they thought it was a gut course, and like easy A, blah blah blah. Because you learned about UFOs, you learned about like cryptids and Bigfoot and hauntings and things like that. And I was so fascinated with that like I wanted to learn more. And Ed and Lorraine Warren actually came to speak at one of our classes. And so I went to Boston College, and because like they were in Connecticut, really close by, I ended up talking to them for a while, and I kept in touch with them like all throughout college. I took some independent studies, investigating the hauntings around Boston. And after college, a guy became friends with the Warrens, and I like kind of interned with them before Ghost Hunters or anything like that was in vogue. But we went on a lot of ghost investigations, and Beth always mentioned that I have I have a vibrating yellow aura that gives off energy, and that a lot of like whenever there's something, an entity or something that needs energy, they can easily pull it off of me. At the same time, because I have I give off energy, a lot of entities can attach themselves to me, you know. And she helped me learn how to control it, just to speak. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, 99.9% of the stuff that I've seen, I don't believe. You know, I'm a skeptic when it comes to that. But at the same time, there's that 0.1% that I can't explain that throws me for a loop still, you know, and like, do I believe that they exist? Yes, but I believe it in a different way than everyone else does. It's like it's all about for me. It's about energy. The consciousness being energy, and that's what sticks around. So
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I think that's the real key focus that nobody talks about. It is energy. It's all about energy. I mean, even we're exchanging energy right now as we're talking. Nobody talks
mhm,
about that. I've had more things happen in my life that I can't explain, and I can't explain it away. And I even did an episode. I have friends that I usually bring on for Halloween that because I'm a card reader myself and I'm a psychic. I also bring on other people. And one of this gift, this toy that my husband had given me, it was a thing, singamajig. Last year, for no reason, before I started to move, it started going off by itself. He gave me this
mhm,
thing in 2012. The batteries are long dead, yet this thing was playing.
mhm.
How do you explain that? You can't really explain it.
Yeah. I
So, I
mean,
mean,
there's some things that like some of the really whacked out stuff that I have actually experienced, that like I sit there and I was like, something has to be there, it has to exist. I mean, I remember being walking through New Orleans. I mean, I went to New Orleans for a birthday, like years ago, with two friends. And I was supposed to like we got a B&B, and it was supposed to be four of us. Two of my friends stayed in one room, and then my one friend Scott was supposed to come with. Was it Scott? I mean, I don't know. One of my friends was supposed to come. He ended up dropping out at the last minute, so I had my room to myself in a B&B, and this was old slave quarters, and it was right off of Bourbon Street, all that kind of stuff. And I knew that there was something there. I felt it, and like that night, I remember like waking. Well, one of the nights we were there for I think 2 or 3 nights. I woken up, and I like the light in the bathroom was on, and it was one of those bathroom doors that had the slats. You can. It wasn't a solid door; it had those slats that the light can come through. You can see the light coming through. And I remember laying in my bed, seeing the light on. I was like, I didn't leave the light on. And behind the door, something moved. You saw a
mhm.
shadow move across the door, like almost like a horror film. And I was like, that was kind of weird. And like all of a sudden I felt that certain chill that like I get when I can feel something taking the energy off of me. I mean, it's not a normal chill. It's a different kind of chill. And I felt that chill happen. Um and so like I didn't really, it doesn't scare me, but I ended up going to sleep, whatever, and falling back to sleep. The next day I was talking to the custodian or somebody at the B&B, and I said to them, I was like, yeah, like the room that I'm in, it's like can you do you know the history of the room? And they're like, what room are you in? And I told them, and they're like, oh, that's the haunted room. was like, what do you mean the haunted room? And they're like, a lot of people have experiences in there, and it's like supposedly, and he's gave me the whole story about this woman who was a slave that lived in those quarters, that occasionally moves things around and can sometimes be seen in the bathroom. They're like
Okay.
lights turn on and off and that kind of stuff. I was like, oh yeah, that happened to me last night. But yeah, I was like walking around, like walking around New Orleans and just saying to my friends, like, "Yep, that place is haunted. That place is haunted," because I could feel the
Hmm.
energy being pulled from me in certain directions, and it was fun. It was a fun little parlor trick that I had to tell you, like, able to say that, yeah, that's this. There's an entity here,
But
So
and what you say is true because my dad and his girlfriend, she has a house in the quarter and they have a slave quarters, and we stayed in the slave quarters when my husband was alive. We stayed in the slave quarters, and she said, "Did you see the ghost?" And I'm like, "No." And yes, I can pick up on stuff, but no, I didn't. She goes, "She only shows it to single men. She only comes out
mhm.
for single men. Otherwise, she hides." I'm like, "Okay." But yeah, I mean, the New Orleans is haunted. I mean, there's ghosts all over there because
Mhm.
of the fact that all the stuff that has gone on down there
Yeah,
back in the
yeah.
day. So
Yeah, I mean,
yes.
like my whole idea, like, I wrote a whole thesis on it, like, on entities and what they are. And like, I mean, I'll just in a nutshell, I mean, like like the way I think of it is, when you die, you're like, it kind of ties into that 12 grams kind of like idea, where when you die, you like, 12 grams, you lose 12 grams of weight. Um, and for me, like, that 12 grams is living energy that dissipates. And when
Mhm.
you die, two things could happen to the energy. It could either dissipate into the atmosphere and become part of physics. Energy can't be destroyed, or like, or created or destroyed. Or it can pool. And if it pools, like where you die, that energy is there after they take your body away. So since consciousness is energy, your consciousness could be part of that pool, that energy pool. So because you're like, like when that pool exists, it can't again create energy. But if somebody gives it energy, it can manifest.
Mhm.
And that's why psychics loved having me around, because when I like, they would bring me, like, with Ed and Lorraine Warren, like, or my professor, we did a number of haunting investigations. um, a lot of psychics loved bringing me around because I gave off a lot of energy. And so whatever is in, like, whatever needs to manifest, they can pull the energy off of me, and then the psychic would actually tell us what's going on, you know and it's fascinating. So yeah, like, that whole entire idea of like energy pooling and consciousness kind of gives weight to the idea of people seeing things and being able to communicate. Because if it's consciousness, obviously there's a little bit of communication going on, like, the ability to communicate. So it's like it's there.
Well, when I talked to a neuroscientist, he talked about us all being connected, and that's one thing we don't think about is that we're all connected. I mean, we have those moments where somebody's going to call, that you're
Mhm.
thinking of something, and then something plays on the radio or something shows up on TV, that exact same thing that you were thinking of. And we have this interconnectedness, but it all stems from energy. And that's
Mhm.
where we are not taught those things. We are not taught
Mhm.
to be more present and be more connected with each other. We're taught to separate. And as you were saying, I wanted to go back because you said earlier you had a lot of experiences when you were a kid. And the fact is, as a kid, we nobody has trained us not to have those
Mhm.
experiences.
Exactly.
We still have all that openness. And I mean, I've worked with clients that their kids were like, "Yeah, last night my daughter told me not to, but that dinner would be free when we go out." And I'm like, "No, it's not." We go to the restaurant, and sure enough, the manager's like, "Oh, we're going to comp your meal today."
Mhm.
So, I mean, it's just interesting that things are presented, but we get so much up in our head that we lose track of what our initial gut hit is, and that this is actually how it's going to play out.
You want me to give you my explanation of that? I wrote
Sure,
actually another thesis on it.
sure.
It's like it's consciousness. Like, no, I wrote this whole thing about consciousness being like a Mobius strip, right? And imagine three cars on that Mobius strip traveling at different speeds. Look in the at the same, like, in the same direction, right? You have the present car, you have the past car, and you have the future car. Um, and you you're obviously traveling in the present car. So everything that's happening with your consciousness is in that present car. Now, sometimes that present car and the future car, and again, they're traveling at different speeds. Sometimes that present car and that future car will intersect right where that Mobius strip intersects, and if it's like your future car intersects with your present car, you're going to have deja vu. You're going to
Hmm.
say like something like that I had a very vivid idea that this is going to happen, and then sure enough, it happens. But do you ever have those times in which you're just sitting there thinking and all of a sudden like somebody from like seventh grade who like pops into your head that you knew like their name, their like their last name, you knew like phone numbers, all this kind of stuff, and it's like it just pops into your head. That's because your past car just intersected with your present car,
Okay.
you know? And it's like, and then you have these memories, and like when you're a little kid, imagine that Mobius strip is a lot smaller because your consciousness hasn't been around that long. So like they're gonna have a lot of these intersections. So like for example, you were saying about like dinner being comp that same night, is because like that like their present car just hit their future car
Hmm.
right at the intersection because like it's so fresh, and like that's it's that whole entire idea of the interconnectedness as you were talking about of consciousness, and being able to recall things or have foresight about things, and like and it being there, so yeah.
It's funny because there's prime example is there was about back in 2022, I wanted to give somebody my book, and I was going to be at the hotel, and I kept saying this was like March. I'm like, well, I need to stay at the hotel. And they're like, why? I said, because I need access to the elevator. And they're like, why do you need access to the elevator? I'm like, I don't freaking know. I just need access to the elevator. Okay, whatever. So we fast forward to August, and I'm sitting in the lobby, and I'm like, well, you know what? I need to go eat. So I'm going to go eat. And upstairs was where you go to the restaurant. Okay. So I get up, I walk over there, and I'm like, oh, wait, there's another lobby. I turn around, hit the button, and the person that I want to give the book to walks out the freaking door of the elevator. And I'm just like, oh, okay. So it all
That's why I
made
need to go to
sense.
the elevator.
Exactly. Because at the time, like, everybody's like, why do you need? I'm like, I don't know. That's all that kept being in my mind was you need access to the elevator.
Hmm.
And sometimes you just have to trust those knowing bits. And I like your theory because yeah, maybe my car kept coming back and saying, okay, be ready.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, that happened to me in London. I was in London. I was supposed to meet my friend Lindsay Parker. She like, she was like we were there for a Cure concert, and we were kept on trying to meet up with each other, but we couldn't get our schedules like, to match. And this was like around 1 a.m., 1 or 2 a.m. in Soho, and if like like if you've been London, everything closes. Everything closes early. I mean, there's restaurants were open, but I remember like going to a restaurant, and I was by myself at the time. I don't know where my friends were, but I was by myself, and I was heading back to the hotel, and I kind of felt like I could walk to the to the hotel, or I could actually take the tube, and I was like, I need to take the tube for some reason. I don't even know why, but something's pushing me to take the tube. And I did that. I took the tube, and all of a sudden, like I'm waiting, and these trains, these subways are long. They're not like they're not like 3 or 4 cars. They're like maybe 17 cars long. And I'm waiting for the tube, and all of a sudden it comes, the door opens, and it's my friend Lindsay right in front of me. Like literally, could have been any other
Uh-huh.
door, but she was right in front of me. And so like I said to her, like, I don't know why, but I needed to be here, and here you are. Let's go so we have pizza, and so like we met each other, and I was just like, it's just the weirdest coincidence,
Well, yeah, there was when I last time I went to New Orleans, my aunt Sandra is somebody I wanted to see, and I told my husband we were driving out to this restaurant, which is an hour and a half away from New Orleans. It's a little restaurant that's well known, Middendorf's, and they only had two locations in like Manchac, which is this little town outside of New Orleans. And so I told my husband, I said the only person I really wish I could see this trip would be my Aunt Sandy because I hadn't seen her in ages. I love my Aunt Sandy, but I'm not going to be able to see her. We're meeting her ex-husband at this restaurant with his current wife, my new aunt, and they've been together forever. And so we're waiting on them to show up. I'm like, I'm going to go to the bathroom. Okay. And my Aunt Sandy does not live here. She lives in Slidell, way away. So I go to the
Mhm.
bathroom. I come in, I'm washing my hands. This woman comes out of the stall, and it's my Aunt Sandra. I'm just like, oh, hi. I mean, there's weird moments like that. That's you can't really explain it. They just like the train.
Mhm.
How on you know?
Well, then you were talking about that how everyone's interconnected. That like I don't know if you're familiar if you were talking about the silver string theory. I mean, there's that whole idea, where it's like everyone's exchanging energy at all times, and you'll get drawn to situations because of the fact that you need to actually be drawn, you know.
Hmm.
And that silver string theory, it's not doesn't really account for that, but that's part of it, where being in the same place at the same at not at the right time with that person and being and it just happens
Hmm.
because I don't believe in fate or providence or anything like that, but there are certain things where things need to happen and they happen, you know.
Well, prime example is when we were moving 2 houses ago. I had this doll case, and this sheet of glass slid off and fell onto the concrete stoop. And my husband's like, just leave it. I'm like, no, there's kids that come and sit on our stoop. Let me pick it up. So we picked it up. We're going. There's a college. They've changed the intersection since then. But I'm looking in my rearview mirror. The light is going to turn red. I hit my brakes. I'm just thinking, looking at the guy behind me, and I'm like, please stop, please stop. He hits us.
Mm,
The kid who was crossing out of the college took off as soon as the light changed. The guy hit us at 60 miles an hour. If we would not have been there, he would have T-boned the kid and most likely killed him.
mm,
So even though we have these great little neat moments, there's also these moments where, maybe you get stuck in traffic because you're going to avoid something else. And that's the
mm,
thing. We don't look at those other pieces. It's like, and I'm not saying everything's fated because we can change those things. There's always moving pieces. But like we were supposed to be there that day.
mhm.
And if I wouldn't have dropped the glass, we wouldn't have been there.
Yeah. Yeah, and like and yeah, like the fact that it actually happened that way, I don't want to say you saved a life, but yeah, like
Hmm.
because it happened, that was one of the results,
Hmm.
So
We digressed. Anyway, so I didn't mean to go all there, but it was kind of interesting. So, as far as what do you have coming up next? I mean, what do you see as far as your next big artist that you're trying to break, that you're going to try to build up?
well, there's a lot of like a lot of artists that I have coming up, and it's like like I almost want to say like I want all of them to blow up,
Uh-huh.
and obviously they won't. But there's some artists that I'm working with. I mean, a lot of my clients are um, artists who have been away for a long time and are coming back again. Like for example, the Vapors, the band that song "Turning Japanese" was huge in the '80s.
Hmm.
And a lot of people didn't hear from them mainly because the band broke up and they were gone for a while. But they did have songs in between, um, and like I want to see them become part of the conversation again, and it's working. It's funny because we're getting them so many interviews. They're going to be everywhere. Hopefully they'll be everywhere. There's another band that I'm working with, Kula Shaker,
I don't
that were
remember them.
big. Yeah, they
Yeah.
were big back in the '90s, and they kind of they disappeared for a while. And they came after me saying, like, we know what like, we know what you've done with other artists. We definitely want to work with you. So I'm going to work with them over this next year to see to hopefully bring them back up to the levels that they maybe not the same levels back then, but at least to a certain level where they made their mark again. You know, and that's one of the things I also love too is like I do a lot of the artists that I work with are artists that I've either loved as a kid or my parents loved. Like Engelbert Humperdinck is an artist that I work with, and is my mother's favorite artist. I did work with Sinatra, the Sinatra like Foundation, and worked a few of his records and helped that move forward. Nat King Cole, all those artists. And bring them back out to prominence. But there's also a lot of artists that I grew up with, like Bauhaus, Love and Rockets, Alison Moyet from Yaz,
Yeah.
um, all those, like, those are the artists that I love. I mean, even EMF, who they had their shining moment, but they want to come back again, and I want to help them, regain that traction again. And I love that. I love being able to work with a band who had, their heyday, but want to come back for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Not just to make money through reunions and stuff like that, but want to be creative again, and write and make new music. Like The Alarm, for example, another
Yeah.
example. I've seen The Alarm almost like over 40 times as a kid. I was a huge fan of them and U2 at the same time, because they were around the same time. And like, now I work with Mike Peters, and at a very pivotal point in his career or his life, where he has cancer. And he wants people to know about his music, but at the same time, he's going through the battle, pretty much the battle of his life, like, right now. And it's like, like, he could help so many people if people knew what he was doing. you know and like, I'm helping his foundation. He has a foundation called Love, Hope, Strength, which builds awareness for cancer and bone marrow transplants, like, building a registry, so people register, like, they in case somebody needs a match for bone marrow, they can go to this registry and find somebody who can donate their bone marrow to help them, like, with their fight against cancer. And like, that sort of stuff is so important to me, because it's important to the artist. And it's important to me just because of humanitarian reasons. But, like, the fact that Mike wants people to know about this, is really, like, I mean, so without saying it sounded corny, is really a beautiful thing. You know, he's a great human, and I want to help him get his message out there. And like, stuff like that. I mean, I think it's great. Like, Tracy Bonham, same thing. She just went through cancer. She just had, like, when I just started working with her last March, I think, and literally 2 weeks after I started working with her, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so I helped her. Like, we got a big story in People magazine about that struggle. And she's like, and she wants people to know about it, because she was helping people. She's raising money now for like, breast cancer survivors and things like that. And I think, like, not just being part of the conversation when it comes to just putting out music, but being part of the conversation about saving other people through my artists' endeavors, I think, is really, really important.
It
I
is.
have an artist, Janet Devlin, who she was, like, on X Factor, and she, like, massive, like, massive footprint in the UK, but people don't really know her here in the US. I'm helping her build the US story. But, like, before she turned 21, because she was thrust into the spotlight, she suffered so many different mental health struggles, from anorexia, from depression, to um, like so many different neuroses. She wrote a whole entire book about it, because she was forced to grow up that quickly, without self care.
Yeah.
And now that she knows what's going on, like, she was on drugs, she was an alcoholic. She's now sober, and she's talking about sobriety, and
Nice.
like, and helping people through that. And it's like, that side of it I think is so important as well. And that goes with building a profile. Making sure that people know that these artists aren't just there to sell their records, and make money. They're also there to help people as well. And I think that's so special when you have an artist like that. And I want to help them build that story, and get their message out.
Well, I think it's the humanitarian, but it's also showing that they're human, because so many times when we talk about fandom,
Hmm.
people lose sight that they're really just people.
Hmm.
And I've talked about this on the podcast before. When Power Station toured years ago, um, they were outside of a bar in New Orleans, and these girls were screaming, going crazy, and just yelling. And I went across the street because my friends were over in that group. I went across the street and I'm looking in the shop window and there's these chain link fence on this window.
Hmm.
And the bodyguard screams out as I'm looking in, they're people, not animals. And something in those words just really hit home that, yeah, they're people. They perform for you. They need time to just relax and be themselves.
Hmm.
And I think that's what we lose track of. We get so wrapped up in, look at, we'll use Taylor again and Britney because they were elevated so high and people wanted a piece of that and they wanted to touch that energy, but they're just human. And
Hmm.
sometimes they have a bad day and sometimes they have a great day, just like
Hmm.
all of us, but we lose that track. And I applaud you for trying to let your artist not just be this puppet or performer. They get to be real
Hmm.
and human and do good things, and you talk about those good things and you allow them to show their flaws, and
Hmm.
that is a credit to the authenticity of being a true publicist, not
Well,
just
thank you.
masking everything and saying, oh, everything's fine, you
Hmm.
know so
Yeah, really showing that humanitarian. But thank you. That's really sweet of you to say, and recognize too. It's like you don't really, you don't, people don't really recognize that side of publicity, in which, like you're working with humans, you're working with people who, like sure, like, like they may have a bad day and they may have snapped at somebody or whatever. Doesn't mean that they're a bad person, you
no.
know. And like if you're interrupting a celebrity while they're eating dinner or having a a very intense conversation, and you're asking them for a selfie or like an autograph, because they don't give that to you doesn't mean that they're an asshole. It
Right.
just means that, like, you might have caught them at a bad time. And I try to explain that to people. I mean, sure, there are artists out there, like I can name a few, that are terrible people, but like, but most, like, but almost everybody is like, they're very human, they're very real.
Hmm.
I love being a publicist and seeing that side of them, and being able to tap into that, and like, I mean, one of my favorite memories is, like, is being with Alison Boyer in a cab in New York, and we were like just going from interview to interview, and we were laughing, and she couldn't remember the lyrics to the Spider-Man theme song, and so she just made them up on the way. And like we were just like laughing so hard. And I kept on saying, is like, we should record this. She's like, no, this is a special moment between you and me. Like,
Nice.
we're like, showing, like, I'm able to show this side of me, that I can be goofy with you. And I was like, thank you, because like a lot of people don't really get to see that,
No,
like, side of people. you know?
no. And that's a gift that you get from them, but it's a gift you give to them because they get to relax.
Hmm. Yeah, indeed. Indeed. And I'm
So
sure, like, this interview has gone a lot longer than you thought it was
no,
going to.
it's fine. It's fine. I was going to wrap it up. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you would like to add?
Not really. You touched on a lot. I mean, like, like everything that I've done is was like, we talked about the ghost hunting, that side, that a lot of people know about me because of my social media. Like, I don't hide that on social media. That was something. I mean, I'm proud of being able to say that I've worked with the Warrens, because they were such special people, and and really brilliant humans, and like, and the fact that, like, my story does have a lot of twists and turns, like being a journalist, animator, DJ, blah 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 blah. It's mind blowing when I kind of sit down and think about it, and I forget about it. And when I'm talking to, like, when I was talking to you about it, it's just like, wow, it's kind of weird. I've actually done a lot of stuff. It's like I feel like like I do have an interesting, like, story to tell, because normally I'm just sitting on the couch watching TV,
No, you
with my
do.
dog.
You do.
So,
Thank you for coming on.
well, thank you for, like, this great conversation.
You're welcome. So that was a wild interview. And Ray, I'm glad I took the chance and reached out to him when Danny Saber was releasing Michael Hutchins stuff. It was one of those moments where it's like, do I want to do this? I'm not sure. And considering we're talking about energy, and I didn't really talk to Ray about this, but it was one of those moments when I was like, yeah, you need to do this. Take that shot, do it, and don't look back. And I did. And he gave me some guests that I've enjoyed interviewing, and I enjoyed interviewing Ray because he has a lot of information. And as he was saying, he realized, and that's the thing, I don't think we actually do this, but he realized how diverse his life has been. When I sit down, I've done the same thing in the past. I've looked at my life and gone, well, wait a second, what all have I done? And you can sit there and put little labels on it, but it's a journey. It's a journey. It's an adventure. And it's like all the people you get to meet, it's kind of crazy because how do you not look at yourself and go, look how I've evolved, look at the things I've learned and the skills I've learned and how I've used these skills to do something else. When we talk about public relations in general, we look at how everything is managed, all the careers are managed, everything is managed, and you don't necessarily always get to see the human side of the person. You get to see, what we present. You get to see the song, you get to hear the song. And as he was saying, we don't have the fandom that we do. Yes, Taylor is an example that we do have fandom, but it's not like it used to be. We don't have the things. I mean, when I was a teenager, we had star hits, we had, bop, we had smash hits for it, depending on, because it transferred over to that. We had all these magazines that gave us pinups for our locker or our bedroom, and there was the music. And then if you opened up the music and you were really excited if you got a gatefold record. And you had the liner notes and you had the sleeves and everything had to be pristine. And yes, I'm still awaiting because with my move, for some reason, the movers put my LPs, which I had 3 boxes of LPs, into the garage. And so I have to unpack the garage to get to them. And it's like, I hope they're okay. Because most of those I've had since I was in high school, which, yeah, now is close to 50 years ago. But yeah, this year, graduated 50 years. Anyway, I digress. So when you look at that, it's like you had the fandom, you collected records, you had the 12 inches, you had the CD singles, you had all these things. But we don't have that anymore because everything now, we have so many channels and so many ways to listen to music. And, it's not like you can pull up to the side of the car and both of you have the same radio station going and you're all just into it. No, now it's more like, okay, well, I got my stuff here, you got your stuff here, and it's not the community that it used to be. And I applaud Ray for wanting to teach people and let people see the humanity of what life is like and how to make things happen. That they're not just the song. They're not just a musician. Chuck, he's a fly fisherman, so we're going to promote him that way. And I think that that's something that shows that they are not just this image, this one static image. It shows diversity. And I think back to going what Ray has done with his life, what I've done with my life, if you look at all the journeys you've been on, even if you started out as a sales clerk at a grocery store and then you progress to something else, you can look at the big picture and see all the things you've done. I mean, I can sit here and say, okay, my very first job was at McDonald's. Okay. And then I went to a drugstore. Then I went to Chuck E. Cheese, or I went to Kmart. Then I went to Chuck E. Cheese. And that was all when I was younger. And then I sold cars. And then I did this. And, it's like the diversity there. If you really look at the diversity, it allowed me to see that even when I was in management, because I had started as a mail person a long time ago, by the time I hit management in insurance, I had respect for that mail file clerk because guess what? I was her at one point. I was her, and it was something that I had to actually look at and go, I have to think about what it was like to be that. I had to remember that. And so look at what you've done with your life. Look at the journey. Look at the good, look at the bad, and see how you grow from there. Because those things will actually help you become a more well-rounded person. Don't just look at a person and think, oh my gosh, on social media did you hear the story about such and such? Did you ever think that they had a bad day? It's like I had a guest on once that talked about Paula Abdul coming into a nail salon and she was just all bothered and pissed off and ticked off. And then she turned around and apologized because she explained to the person what had happened. Because just like you and me, they have things happen. So understand that and know that and be open to it. Because wherever you are, even if it's not that right moment in your journey, things happen for that reason, just like that kid that we talked about. If I would not have dropped that glass, that kid might not have survived. So take that moment where you're at. Look at all the lessons from the past. Take them, own them. Improve your life and move forward, because you never know where that journey is going to go. And yes, now it's like, no, it's not an earthquake. It's the phone shaking because it's on a pedestal. But understand that just because you start out in one place, he started out as a journalist and it wasn't paying the bills. So he moved and he changed. And because he did those, he took those leaps. He got to watch Britney Spears. Come on. He got to watch Britney Spears become this huge artist. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine what it would be like to be able to help and foster somebody, to watch them follow their dream and it take off? Think about that. And yeah, I know somebody's saying, well, maybe she wasn't. Well, we're not looking at Britney now. We're looking at Britney then. And that's what she wanted. That was her dream. And so when somebody is there willing to help you follow your dream, allow them to do it. And follow your own dreams. Don't get caught up in fear. Don't think that this is it. Allow yourself to grow and to experience things. So, on that note, I'd like to thank Rich Zai for 30-year audio for doing the audio sound. I'd like to thank Fast Susie for the intro and outro music. And I'd like to thank Ray for coming on because, yeah, it was really a fun interview. But most importantly, I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in. And whenever you're listening, morning, noon, or night, well, I really do appreciate it. And I'll catch you next time, guys. Bye.